Assalamu alaikum everyone, and good morning to day 2 of the Pathways to Development Conference. We're about to start the first session, which is addressing the population challenge with Dr. Zeba, Sathar, Saima, Bashir, Aasim, Husain, who's going to be joining us online, and Dr. Attiya, Inayatullah. So with that, I now would like to invite the chair to maybe introduce the panelists, and then we can start. Thank you.
A very good morning and assalamu alaikum to all. I feel that, as we know, time and tide wait for no one. And the organizers who have curated today's program have put together some excellent presentations. So without any delay, let us move forward. After the 3 presentations, we'll move into questions and answers. Our first speaker today is Dr. Zeba Sathar, who is sitting on my left. She is the country director of the Population Council of Pakistan, which, as you all know, is an international INGO. And having introduced her as that, I really don't need to say anything else. But the fact of the matter is that Zeba gives lead and initiates technical assistance. She does human resource development. She is one of the great sources of information and credible work in Pakistan. And not only that, she's also very instrumental in setting the international agenda on demography, population, and family planning through Population Council. And Zeba, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you for such a generous introduction. I don't think I deserve any of that. Thank you to LUMS for arranging a session, though they deliberately, I think, kept it for very early in the morning to give us a wake-up call about a very important topic. It usually gets left out of the, especially when economists organize such a session, including my own original institution, PIDE, tends to leave out demography. So I'm very, very happy that, I just wanted to read from your own note, Dr. Ali Chima, which you sent to me when you were beginning to organize this conference. While the country has made progress in reducing the number of people living in poverty, very large proportions of the population remain vulnerable to negative shocks that are increasingly linked to climate change. Investments in social development have been inadequate, particularly for children, and have not kept pace with population growth. I think that in itself, it comes in the middle of your concept note. There's a lot. I would say I had the pleasure of attending the session last night, the last session with Miftah Ismail and Dr. Sania Nishtar, perhaps two of the best minds and people of power in Pakistan, and repeatedly they kept referring to such high population growth rate or large numbers. But yet there is very little discussion, I think, about what are the solutions. And for the obvious question, and I don't know whether when we make presentations like this, I did want to put on the table whether there is any political will to tackle the population issue, or are we just going to wait and see us turning into a nation of 300 from 200 and then on to 400? So I think this is a difficult task to actually, in a small, an hour session, to actually deal with the issue, as they say, and try and come up with solutions. But I tried to just walk you through maybe what I think are some of the empirical evidence, and maybe leave it up to the minds in this room and others to really think about how to salvage the demographic transition. So let me start by saying that one of the best social experiments around pieces of evidence is really, if I may, somebody is operating this, I believe, so, oh, you are, okay, thank you. I think for me, it's a really natural experiment if we compare these two countries. When we talk about political will, Bangladesh in 1971, right away, right after independence, did decide. There was political will, and it has continued. The policy they adopted was clearly one, and Miftah Ismail, I'd like to refer back to his point yesterday. What's the big difference between Pakistan and Bangladesh? They don't have much going for them. The one thing that he singled out was really they have a lower population. I mean, they lowered their population. It didn't happen just by chance. We start off very similar situation in 1971. And if I may move to the next slide. This is the trajectory of Bangladesh is on the left. We are using the UN population projections. So you can see till about 1971, it's not very different. But look at the trajectory now. So it's very, very different. Bangladesh is going to stabilize at about, I think, the max that they will hit will be 200 million. And we are reaching for 400 million plus. In fact, ironically, the UN Population Division that revises the projections just this year has revised us upwards. So it doesn't look good for us at all. I mean, we are already about, I think in the next slide, or maybe later on, I show that we are already about 56 million more than, in fact, I think it's 60 million more. Saima can correct me. And we are going to be much, much more, 200 million more eventually. So did this all happen by chance? As I said, no. There was political will, resources were put into lowering population growth rate, and it happened, in my next slide, please. So the fertility trends diverged pretty much around 1980, in the 80s. Where fertility began to fall rapidly in the case of Bangladesh due to their very, very intensive family planning program. We too had a family planning program, and who would know better about the program than Dr. Attiya and Inayatullah, our chair today. So the imprint was there. It was just very, very, we had all the plans, the policy, etc. But I keep on repeating, I don't think there has ever been strong political will or patronage or a desire to really actually lower fertility. I've written about this, as you said, and now I've tired of saying that this went wrong and that went wrong. I really want to zero in on what the one factor is. I just don't think we were interested in lowering fertility, and now I've started to question as to why everything has a rational explanation. And why don't we invest in social development? I think we should really start digging deeper for those answers. And it is really around political economy. It is not just because we can't implement things and we have good plans or something went wrong or we had, now the latest is that we have floods. I mean, there is always an excuse. Every year we had war on terror. But now I've begun to dig deep, and I think that it is really there must be very, very solid answers, and some of them they must be very difficult to express. But I do think that there is somebody or some quarters must benefit from a large population size. And even in debates in PIDE, we had a turnaround conference, I think, Saima, you were there, that the Planning Commission, and many people in the room said our biggest advantage is our large population. So if academics can say that at a very large conference of, with 200, 300 people sitting in the room, then you start thinking there must be some backing for this philosophy. Anyway, I'm not here to state the problem, but to try and suggest some answers. Can we move on, please? It's like the fog today, something slowed down. Okay, so the basic driving force, whereas fertility is determined by marriage trends, and fortunately for Pakistan, female age at marriage has been going up dramatically. I don't actually have a slide, but I think you do, Saima. Without any policy drivers really, age at marriage has dramatically, it's the one demographic, there are a couple of demographic changes that have happened in Pakistan, such as, of course, migration is led, you can explain migration, but you can really not explain the rise at age at marriage, and it has occurred across all groups, and to which we owe our slight lowering of fertility that I showed in the previous slide. But the one thing that hasn't really progressed is really contraceptive use. The use of contraception within marriage, obviously, has not really taken hold. And as you can see from the rather flattening of the curve, it did rise in the 1990s when we had a very dramatic intervention, the Lady Health Workers Program. I think that was reaching out to almost 100,000 workers reaching out to rural communities, and rural contraception went up. Then you did see this change. But again, the comparison with Bangladesh shows such a contrast. They're at about 65% use of contraception. We're at half at that, 35, and it hasn't really changed for the last about 8 or 9 years. So moving on. So, and the other thing that I keep pointing to is really demand, the demand for contraception. We do have a gap between the demand and use, which we call unmet need. And that is what we consider very low-hanging fruit. If there was a more active program, more deliberate effort, meeting that gap would change. But ultimately, what we want is that gap to keep expanding and for demand to be going up. And you can see demand for contraception is really much higher, almost double. It's stagnating in Bangladesh too, but at 70%, we are kind of leveling off at about 45-50%. So actually, the societal makeup is totally different. I mean, when 70%, which is close to like developed countries, in a poor country like Bangladesh, well, no longer poorer than us, but we were about the same levels, really is dramatic that they should have such a high demand and that it should have gone up in the same time period. So moving on. So I've already kind of pointed out to the difference, what it means. I think you can extrapolate what that means for our out-of-school population. You have to school, so many more children, what it means for those people living in poverty. The numbers, we're really galloping along, and I have done the calculations that actually, if we had followed the trajectory for Bangladesh, we would have only about a couple of 100,000 children out of school, because we made the effort. It's not that Pakistan hasn't made the effort, but it's just all been eaten up by population growth rate. So moving on to some of the analysis next is really, and also financing. This is another piece of evidence that we really don't mean business. Our financing for family planning this is just domestic, it's not international. Of course, Bangladesh received a lot of attention from donors and did receive international financing, but even the domestic resources put to family planning is 1.4. Even now, when they're leveling off, and at a recent international conference, they were talking about what to do about beyond replacement, and we are not even anywhere near replacement. Next, please. So we do always look for where do we expect change to happen more, and you expect that urban. There will be more, if I can keep moving faster now, that you would expect urban fertility to be much lower. Well, it is about now, it's when we first started looking at these differentials, you can see there was very little differences between urban and rural. In fact, if you extrapolate to the 70s, there was hardly any, urban fertility was actually higher. So you are seeing a lowering of urban fertility, but I think much of it is due to age at marriage of women, because I'll show you later on that the contraceptive use differentials aren't very, very dramatic. Next. But just going back to that, we don't need to go back to the slide, but the idea behind that is, I recently wrote a paper on, if, let's say, we are reaching the tipping point of 50%, we've actually done paper analysis with GMR Sahab, that if you really define urban properly, as it has not been done in the last census, we're probably already at 47% urban. But that hasn't really dramatically changed Pakistan, even though 47%. And even in terms of fertility, it's not that if we become even more urbanized that we'll see dramatic change. Whatever is holding us back is really also holding us back in urban areas. Secondary education does have, obviously, not so much primary education, but post-secondary education for women has an effect. But then looking at the numbers of women who are making it, the progress is so slow in education. It's almost as lamentable as what is happening in population. The investments similarly are very low, so you don't really expect secondary education to make a huge, women's secondary education to make a huge impact. Next. The differentials that really are striking are those by income, and they reinforce the fact that not only is the demand for children quite different across income classes, but access. The mindset may have changed for the very richest, but even then the fertility is at around 3, which would have been at about 2.8, just below 3. And that's not very, very low compared to, if you would look at the same income group, let's say in Bangladesh, it would be something like 1.5 or even 1.2. So again, the income differential is something that I want you to absorb, because it's something we can do. You can almost see, as I will show you in the next slide, that there is greater unmet need amongst the poorest. And I think that is the policy recommendation that I would really like to focus on, that there are sufficient numbers, and we've calculated them in the millions, and it is like at least 5 or 6 million women who fall into the poorest income group who do have unmet need. And we have actually successfully done an intervention that I'll very briefly talk about, because I think I must be running out of time. So next, please. So as you can see, the contraceptive prevalence rates are, if you see the blue line, it's sort of faded blue on as I see it. There were sharp differentials in contraceptive use, but they've leveled out. This indicates to me that wherever we have reached, it's sort of plateauing out. The differentials aren't great. But the income differentials are still enough to warrant some sort of intervention. Next, please. And I'll skip this because it's basically showing that there are dramatic differences. This is pooling data from 91, 2007, and 2018. So in terms of time, we are improving, but not dramatically between 2007 and 2018. The differentials by education are flattening out, even though they are there. But the ones by income are and this is after controlling for everything, remain strong and quite statistically significant. All of them are statistically significant because pool data is large enough to make them. So, but I think the income differentials are really dramatic. Next. Please, next. I would skip this too and go direct to some of the recommendations. No, if we could just stick with the private sector. Even though use is pretty low, what is happening is really that the private sector is turning to provide family planning services. More so, it's happening in the urban and rural areas. Again, it's a poor quality, poor access of public sector, family planning services. And the other problem in Pakistan, which is unique to Pakistan, is the segregation of services between population welfare and health. And that is a policy recommendation. It's a CCI recommendation that all public health outlets provide family planning. But in actuality, it's just not happening. I think most health outlets, and this is a age-old problem that Dr. Attiya has, well aware of, and we recently were sitting in a committee here, I think in Punjab, trying to discuss ways of merging the problem. And I think back to Miftah Ismail's point yesterday, where he said, I think that many of our public sector departments are just there because they employ a lot of people. I think really, I'm being very harsh this morning, but I think it really applies to the population welfare, where the number of people employed are really not commensurate with what is actually being produced in terms of numbers that are using contraception that get it from public outlets. So it really is the way forward, as I see it, is really incentivizing the private sector to family planning. About 10 years ago, there were very few women. I mean, the tipping point for women who were, using institutional delivery, they were delivering at home. Within 10 years, we see a dramatic doubling of women delivering at institutions. Who's doing that? The public sector led the way. It was a deliberate effort, particularly here in Punjab, to bring women to institutions for delivery. And then the real delivery response really came from the private sector. I think the same will happen for family planning, but nobody has really tapped the for-profit private sector for family planning. We recently started working with male doctors, in fact, this month, and they were looking at contraceptives, and they didn't know what an IUD looked like, or so that's how poor our orientation is generally, and I think there is real hope for the private sector taking over. Next slide. I think I'll skip this one and come to this intervention. Yesterday there was talk about, can pilots work? Can they be upscaled? Well, we're very proud of this particular one because it was designed, I think Dr. Cheema knows that I tried to introduce the same idea when we were both on the board of BISP, but we used an intervention to offset, gave vouchers to BISP beneficiaries and Rahim Yar Khan. It's too complicated, just to explain it all in 1 minute, but within 6 months of this intervention that was actually implemented by the Punjab Population Innovation Fund with government financing from Government of Punjab. Within about 3 months of this intervention, it was aimed at BIS beneficiaries, the poorest of the poor. 22,000 beneficiaries, BIS women actually came and sought services for family planning. It is being upscaled in 4 districts in Punjab. And we are very, very working hard to try and see if it can become part of the regular BISP cash transfer program. Not really calling it a conditional cash transfer, but really amount of money is paid to the woman once she travels. It's really to offset travel costs. The people who are paid are the for-profit private sector providers in the area. The point here was that I think it's all doable. It's very, very low cost. I don't think you can read this very well, but it was about rupees 2,000 per woman is what the cost was to the government of Punjab, and I think the benefits will be huge. It'll, not only the point of interest is it was really purely the empowerment of women. They felt empowered with that. I'm getting that 300 rupees when I go out, and she could actually go out on her own or get transport. So things can be done, even in Pakistan, at low cost. As I come back to my original point, and I will like to conclude and not go to the conclusions that we had from here, is really that the political will. And I think people, if the economists who are more powerful than us demographers really make up their minds to really say that this is central for us to achieve our other development objectives, that's when I think things will happen. Otherwise, I think we have tried our very best, and I just see that our voices don't really reach the levels that your voices reach, and I really urge you, particularly Dr. Cheema, I'm looking at you. When somebody, I think Miftah Ismail remembered something you had recommended ages back, and I think that if you have that powerful voice, if you can raise this point, that the time has come really to not just talk about population as if it happens in the air. Much can be done about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zeba. As always, you have set the scene for us admirably. Are we going to get Dr. Aasim? Is he available? Okay. Oh, okay. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the session. Dr. Aasim Husain is with us all the way from Washington. Is it Washington? Yes. It's a cold, smoggy day in Lahore. I hope it's better your end. Mr. Aasim Husain is an IMF person, career-wise. And from 1990, he has held a number of important assignments as Deputy Director in the Middle East and Central Asian Department, the European Department and Strategy, Policy and Review Department, where he led the fund's policy development work on capital flows and reviewed country work on many of the large emerging market economies. And with that, there's much more to be said about you. I do hope you can stay on with us for the question and answer session as well. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so
It's
first I will
loud
try
and
to do
clear.
a technically challenging thing, which is share my screen so that my presentation is visible to all of you. And I think that does it. So thank you for the introduction. And just to clarify one thing at the very outset, which it was implicit in what you said, but I just wanted to make it explicit. I am no longer with the IMF, so I don't dare to speak on behalf of the IMF on anything. And this is all, of course, my own personal work as well as my own personal views that I would like to share with you. And with that, let me get started. And I have to say, Dr. Zeba, even though I shared my presentation, I had not shared my remarks. And it's where you left things is a fantastic starting point for me. Because where I was planning to start was to say that I'd like to tell a story today in my few minutes that I have. And in that story, I wanted to sort of build on three questions. The first one is where you left things, which is why should macroeconomists in Pakistan pay close attention to what demographers are saying? So I hope to answer that question in the next few minutes. The second one is very closely related, and which is that why or how has the failure to address demographic challenges in Pakistan held up macroeconomic performance in the country? The third question that I would like to try and sort of address in the next few minutes is, what does all that mean then for sort of future macroeconomic prospects for Pakistan? So with that, let me get started. I like to move to my first slide. So this shows this is the start of the story. So Pakistan 50 years ago was ahead of all its neighbors in terms of income per capita. We were richer than our peers. And this shows, this is World Bank data. It shows the picture on the left in 1971, a little over 50 years ago. Pakistan was slightly wealthier on a per capita basis, or earning slightly more income per year than Sri Lanka, and quite a bit more than Bangladesh and India. Today, the picture is almost the opposite. We are indeed the lowest among the four. And the Sri Lanka numbers are, I guess, pre-crisis for them. But look at the comparison. We're about 1/3 of Sri Lanka, half of, maybe a little more than half of India, and well behind, or little over half of Bangladesh, and well behind India as well. So what went wrong? The performance, now this slide shows how national income per capita grew in the 1970s and 1980s in the four countries. So already Pakistan's performance was a little bit weaker than the other countries in the neighborhood, but not dramatically so. So as you see in this picture, and the general sense I want to give you is that all four countries were growing at about the same pace in the first 2 decades, in the 1970s and in the 1980s. But then after that, the picture changed quite dramatically. So Sri Lanka already in the 1990s starts growing quite a bit faster than everybody else, and then really picks up speed at the start of this century. And at the start of this century, India and Bangladesh also start to grow noticeably faster. Bangladesh from a lower level than Pakistan, but growing faster. And by the last decade or so, the picture is dramatically different. And Pakistan is growing significantly worse or more slowly than the others. Now, why did that happen? There is no single reason, although I'm going to highlight one, and that one is population growth. So what you have in this chart is population growth in the 4 countries. I've indexed everything to 100 for each country in 1971. So what this chart hopefully very clearly shows is in Pakistan in 50 years, population has almost quadrupled. Sri Lanka at the other end has less than doubled its population in 50 years. And India and Bangladesh about 2.5 times over that period. So the number of people, which is the lower part of the ratio income per capita, the number of people in Pakistan has grown so dramatically that the ratio has gotten worse. But it's not quite as simple as that. Because yes, if you increase the number of people, the ratio by definition gets worse, but more people also means more production, more income, more output, because at least some of those people are of working age or will become of working age and will produce and add to the economy and so on. And so there is some feedback effect. And so the situation is a little bit more complicated. But nevertheless, I think the pure population chart shows a lot. Let me try and dig a little bit deeper. So it's not just the population, but the structure of the population that matters. And when you have a population that's growing very rapidly, then of course there's a lot of children. And so the proportion of the population that is young, and in this case, young is defined as the share of the population that is under 15 years old. The youth or the young population and the share of the young population matters a lot in things like saving. So how much of a family's income is saved depends a lot on how many children the family has. So think for a moment about 2 families that are identical. They have the same income, they have the same wealth. In all respects, they're very similar, or they're exactly the same, except for one. One has 2 children and the other has 6 children. So if they have the same income, which family will have more saving? Clearly, the one with 2 children compared to the one with 6 will be able to save more. If you aggregate this to a national level, the same is true. Saving in a country where the percentage of children in the overall population is less is going to be higher. Now, it turns out that this holds when in statistical investigations of macroeconomic relationships. So in the determinants of savings, the age structure of the population has a powerful and significant effect. Before going to actually the numbers and the relationship, let me just show another version of the share of population that is of working age. So this is in a way the inverse of the young population age. I'm leaving out the elderly population, but for the moment, think of this as sort of the mirror image of the young population. Now here, as you will see, again, the progress in Pakistan, as with the youth population, the share of the youth population coming down was much less in Pakistan. Here, the share of the working age population, the progress in that in Pakistan is much less than on our neighbors. In fact, we made negative progress in the 70s and 80s, and only around the turn of the century does the share of the working population actually start to increase, whereas our neighbors started to see a significant rise in the working age population ratio much earlier. So what does this mean in terms of saving? In this graph, what I would like to share with you is saving rates in each of the 4 countries. So as you will see, the green line, which is Pakistan, has the lowest saving rate, especially in the last 2 decades, compared to our neighbors. And in fact, our savings rate has averaged between 5 and 10% of GDP for the last 20 years. This compared to between 20 and 25 in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, and over or 30 or around 30 for India. So much lower saving. And I think the relationship that I showed you in the previous slide, which is the share of the working age population, has a lot to do with it. In fact, if I use numbers that a colleague and I estimated for Southeast Asia a few decades ago, when they were experiencing a very major change in their population structure as population growth slowed in Southeast Asia in the 80s. They saw a very rapid increase in saving and in investment. We used sort of numbers that we obtained there and tried to think that what if Pakistan had a saving rate that was similar to its neighbors rather than what you actually experience. So in other words, if Pakistan had savings rate in the region of 20% of GDP rather than 5 to 10% of GDP, what would that have meant? And that would have meant, of course, much more investment. So here's a chart that shows investment in Pakistan compared to India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Much lower. Again, many other factors do contribute to this, but the availability of saving is clearly an important one as well. So if saving had been higher by 10 percentage points, investment could have been higher by a similar fraction at least, and possibly more. Now, in principle, investment doesn't have to come only from domestic saving. It can come from foreign saving too. But as we have seen across the world, and especially in developing countries, the unlimited access to foreign saving is simply not feasible. So domestic saving does, in fact, determine the level of investment domestically. So if domestic saving had been 10 percentage points higher, domestic investment could have been 10 percentage points higher. And if there had been a multiplier effect, in other words, higher saving leading to higher income, which in turn leads to even more saving, and so on, then the impact on investment and on total saving, for that matter, would have been more still. But suppose that it was just 10 percentage points. What would that have meant in terms of growth? And so again, using numbers on averages from other countries and so on, higher investment by 10 percentage points of GDP sustained would mean up to between 2.5% to 3% faster growth per year. Now, even 2.5% faster GDP growth per year over 50 years means a massive difference. So in other words, GDP per capita today in Pakistan would have been something on the order of $3,500 in today's dollars, rather than something like 12 or 1,300. So almost 3 times as much. A dramatic difference had we been able to control our population growth and the share of young in our population, or the share in working age in our population, even to the extent of our neighbors. Now, what does this mean going forward? So, of course, what Dr. Zeba and other demographers will tell us about how to do this, but this is not something that can be done next year or the year after. So for the next, whatever, decade, maybe more, that it takes for us to have an age structure of our population that is similar to our neighbors, it means that during those 10 years or more, we may be stuck with lower growth than those countries, unless we can do better than them in other parts, in other determinants of saving and investment. So for example, we would need to do better than them in terms of financial development. We would need to do better than them in terms of competitiveness. We would need to do better than them in terms of productivity, just to be able to grow as fast as them until our demographic structure improves to the structure that they currently have. Thank you.
Dr. Aasim, thank you very much for a lucid, brief presentation. It certainly tells us that the demographic oblique population shackles which Pakistan is carrying are the worst in the region. And I don't know if we can improve financially, but certainly, as Zeba has said, with the political will, we can do it in terms of population. And with that, I would like to immediately move to the third speaker of today, and that is Dr. Saima Bashir. She is a senior research demographer and head of the Social Dynamics Unit at PIDE. And PIDE, as we all know, is one of the leading institutions for research in Pakistan. Dr. Saima, her recent and current line of research focuses on the political implications of changing the age structure in Pakistan. Her research interests include demography, family, gender, inequity, and population and health. She studies fertility and family behavior, maternal and child health, and family demography. And that's a big agenda. She's going to speak to us today on socio-demographic dimensions of fertility stall in Pakistan.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First of all, I would like to say that it's such a great honor to share this forum with such esteemed panelists. Dr. Zeba is my mentor, and I learned a lot from her. So grateful to you, ma'am, for teaching. And whatever I am doing today, it's just because of you and Dr. Husain. Thank you. Today, actually, Dr. Zeba and Dr. Aasim, they both touched almost the macro level. So I am looking at some of the socio-demographic dimensions that led to the slow fertility decline in Pakistan. I will start, my presentation has two parts. In the first part, I will just look at the behavior of the recognized determinant of fertility, how they are going on, what their status is in Pakistan, and then I will look into the, what are the various socio-cultural issues that may be a hindrance to fertility decline in Pakistan. So, next slide, please. So if we look at this graph, we see that Pakistan population has doubled twice in last 75 years. First in 1972 and then in 1998. And the recent population census of 2017 counted around 208 million inhabitants in Pakistan with intercensal population growth rate of 2.4%. What does this mean? This means that if the population growth continues the way it is, and nothing changed, and business as usual is happening, then Pakistan population will double in next 29 years, whereas the doubling time for other South Asian countries is around 58 years. In the next graph, you see that, this is the crude death and crude birth rate in last 75 years, and we see that there is a substantial decline in mortality, but the corresponding decline in fertility is not observed in the way. And if we look at the difference between crude birth rate and crude death rate, it's almost same in last 70 years. This substantial decline in mortality rate has led to a substantial increase in life expectancy. Next, please. And you know, the life expectancy at birth has substantially increased to 68 years, and with women life expectancy at 68 years in 2020, whereas the male life expectancy is around 66 years. This substantial increase in life expectancy and decline in mortality has led to, next please, this a huge population growth in Pakistan. And this graph that actually shows you the situation of fertility stall in Pakistan. We see that population decline gained momentum in 1990s, there is a decline in total fertility rate from 5 births per woman to around 4.1 births by 2006-07. But after that, we actually see that it is not declining. And there is around only 0.5 children per woman in last 11 years. And if we go by the recent Pakistan maternal mortality survey of 2019, that puts the total fertility rate even higher at 3.9 births. So this shows that actually nothing is happening, and this green line that shows you the current contraceptive prevalence rate, and again it shows that the family planning program got some strengthened through the introduction of lady health worker program, as Dr. Zeba mentioned as well, that in 1990s there is a significant improvement in current contraceptive prevalence rate from 13% in 1990 to around 35% in 2013. But after that, there is a plateau. And in fact, there is a percentage decline in current contraceptive prevalence rate according to Demographic Health Survey. So this shows that maybe there is no demand for contraception and something is gone. But this overall, next slide, please. This overall high fertility rate, that graph actually hides the picture of this about the mortality. You know, there is a theoretical link between child mortality and the couple's decision to have the children. When the parents have that confidence that their child will survive the next 5 years, they will not go to the strategy of replacing the child. But we see that in last 3 decades, there is not a substantial decline in infant mortality rate. It's still much higher than other South Asian nations. And if we look at the neonatal mortality rate, which I'm not showing here, Pakistan has one of the highest neonatal mortality rate in the world. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the population and its issues, there are some recognized determinants, and I'll touch them briefly before moving on to my actual presentation. The recognized determinant of fertility decline are usually age at marriage, contraceptive use, female education, and female labor force participation. Next slide, please. So we see that over time there is an increase in age at marriage, median age at marriage, but in Pakistan, females are marrying earlier than men, and according to the Demographic Health Survey of 2017-18, 8% of the married women, actually they have their first birth before the age of 18. So the early marriage is still very much happening in Pakistan. This is, Dr. Zeba has shown this graph, so I'm just going through it. This family planning program overall remains weak in Pakistan, though, as I mentioned earlier, they got strengthened at community level with lady health worker, introduction of lady health worker program. But now the statistics are showing that nothing is happening. And as Dr. Zeba mentioned that it could be the political will or whatever. I'm sorry, I don't have much answer to a lot of questions, but this is what is happening. And there is the current modern contraceptive use in Pakistan just stands at 25% in 2018. What of the among major reasons of this low contraceptive use is the high unmet need in Pakistan for family planning. This demographic health survey of 17-18 shows that around 17% of currently married women have unmet need for family planning. Unmet need for family planning means either they want to limit their childbearing or they want to space their births. If we account for this unmet, this 17% of the proportion of the women who want to use contraceptive, but they are not using contraceptive due to various reasons, then our contraceptive prevalence rate would climb up to 52%. And that's a huge opportunity, as Dr. Zeba mentioned, that if we tap this potential, then we can do something to lower our fertility and population growth. Again, the relationship between current contraceptive use and education is well known, and that literature suggests us that educated women are more likely to use contraception as compared to the women with no formal education. This is a study by me and Gazo, and it shows that demographic transition actually is happening in Pakistan, but at a very slow pace. And the women with no formal education are actually driving that demographic transition. Because this is a comparison between 1990 and 2018, and it's a couple level data. And it shows that women with no formal education, there is a substantial increase in contraceptive use among them. But at the same time, if we look at the women with higher education, then we don't find the improvement in contraceptive use which we wanted to have. So there is a very limited marginal increase in contraceptive use among them. What actually it means that it's really good to focus on women with no formal education and those who are living in the poor and rural areas. But at the same time, we should not forget, and we should also advocate and provide the services to women with higher education. So we have to cater to the needs of women across all age and educational groups for family planning. When we talk about education, then we see that Pakistan has the lowest female education in Pakistan, and gender gap is substantial in terms of education in Pakistan. Next. Although, if we just look at this graph, this is just the repetition of the same graph, but it's only for Pakistan. And over last 75 years almost, we have seen a substantial increase in women education. But still, women are trailing behind their male counterparts in terms of getting education. But this increase in education has not translated into labor market. Labor market, and only 20% of the women in Pakistan are actively participating in labor force. So when we look at all these indicators, then we see that though some changes are happening in Pakistani society, but particularly the socio-economic development and female participation in the education, but Pakistan's population growth and fertility trends are not following the trajectory of the similar developing countries. So there is something which is not working in Pakistan context. And here I advance another hypothesis that maybe our socio-cultural dynamics are the reason that are not going hand in hand with population decline. Next, please. So, Pakistan society is very traditional, and early marriages are quite common, and marriage is actually universal and early. And it is viewed as a disgrace for the couple to not produce children, particularly for wife. And by producing children, particularly the son, a woman's status is raised in the society. And again, at the same time, Pakistan's, if we look at the statistics, then Pakistan society feels like it favors the high fertility. So I looked at the trends in cousin marriages over time, and we see that in last 3 decades, there is not much variation in trends in cousin marriages. More than 50% of the marriages are happening among the first cousins, and only 1/3 of the marriages are among unrelated individuals. Prevalence of cousin marriages is due to various reasons. For example, enhanced family bond, reason related to dowry. In terms of conflict, both families can sit together and solve. But it has various implications. Implications in terms of early age at marriages, low female education, high fertility, because if you are marrying early, then the reproductive lifespan is quite vast, and you can have more children. So if we see that in last 3 decades, there is a substantial increase in age at marriage across all relationship types, but we see that the increase is more pronounced in age at marriage among unrelated individuals. And cousin marriages are still happening at early ages. And there is an inverse relationship. The relationship has reversed over time between cousin marriages and fertility. In 1990s, the fertility was lower in cousin marriages and higher in unrelated couples, but it has reversed by 2018. And it shows that now the marriages that are happening within the family, they have higher fertility than the fertility among unrelated or non-cousin marriages. The higher, though I am not showing it here, but the higher fertility among cousin marriages could be the result of the high child mortality in the cousin marriages. And this is confirmed. I'm not showing that graph over here, but the experience of child loss is much higher among cousin marriages than, so maybe this fertility is due to that high child mortality among the cousin marriages. But when we look at the prospect of, when we talk about whether Pakistan has that prospect of fertility decline, so if we look at this desired family size, then it shows that there is a long way to go from a high fertility of 3.6 births per woman to replacement level fertility. And because in the last 3 decades, we don't see much change in desired family size among women. The current desired family size is still 4, which is much higher, and it is almost stable over time. And in Pakistan, the desired family size and actual fertility actually rather precisely match with each other. In 1990, actual fertility was much higher than the desired fertility, but over time we see that there is, both are going, there is not much change happening. Although in 2017-18, the actual fertility is slightly lower than the desired fertility, but the gap between these two is very minimum. So one observation could be that both actual fertility and desired fertility both don't show any pattern of change over time, and they are not going down. So when we talk about stated ideal, for instance, if I ask you how many kids you want to have in your life, when you, so that's another indicator, and to ask that whether you want to have any more children, that is, these two are totally different indicators. So in this graph, I just looked at that desire of no more children by number of living children. You have a particular number of children, and then we ask you, do you want to have any more children? And you see that across, there is a far lower proportion of both men and women who want to avoid having any more children. For instance, if we look at this, far less than 50% of both men and women with 3 living children stated that they don't want to have any more children. This data I got from a paper from Shannon in 2018, who looked at son preference and family limitation in Pakistan. And it looked at the ideal sex composition. And this shows that to compare the 1990 data is, I think it's unrealistic because the non-numeric response was really high. But if we look at 2006 and 2012-13 data, then we see that a greater proportion of both men and women, around nearly 1/3, stated that they want to have more boys than girls. Okay. And far less, around 2 to 3% only said that they want to have more girls than boys. And around 50% reported that they want to have equal sex composition, but if we look at the son preference, then that is high, and it is much higher among male counterparts. And you know, in Pakistan, we talk about demographic dividend because we have the youth population. Around 28% of our population is between the ages of 15 to 29. And this is the peak reproductive as well as productive lifespan. And youth is considered as the agent of change as well, and they are more acceptive of the modern family ideals. So in this, I just looked at, I restricted my analysis to the youth of 15 to 24, ever married men and women, and I just looked at what is their ideal sex composition. And again, the results are remarkably similar with the earlier paper. And nearly 1/3 of the men and women are stating that they want to have more boys than girls. So this shows that the son preference is still existing, and that could be the result of social security issues and poverty and lack of education and all these things. So in summary, it is clear that Pakistan is presently passing through a slow fertility transition, and the acceptance of a two-child family size appears to be limited. And the desire for 3 to 4 children is the key that is actually main hindrance towards the slower fertility decline and the demand for contraceptive use. And family patterns, particularly living in an extended family system with high incidence of first cousin marriages, probably reinforce the high fertility regime. So if we look at the other developing countries, and we see that as women entered into the paid labor force, their fertility declined because they have to choose between their work and income and to stay at home to have to take care of their children. But in Pakistan, that is not happening. So it could be that Pakistani women are avoiding that trade-off because of the support of extended family system. Because when they are in cousin marriages, both the paternal and maternal family comes to take care of the children. To conclude, without a substantial social change, the decline in fertility seems non-promising. Provision of better housing, women's empowerment, and education could be effective tools for a change towards smaller family norms. But expansion of education is not enough. Participation of young women in the formal labor market is a condition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saima. You have covered so much ground in such a short time, and I particularly want to thank you for looking at the socio-cultural aspects which relate to consanguine marriage, to joint family systems. Equally important, you've talked of education, health, and then, of course, you have also indicated that poverty is a big cause of people accepting family planning. We have had 3 stimulating papers, lots of food for thought. I'm happy to see that all 3 have not mentioned that Islam is the impediment. And I don't think that religion is, but I am sure that maybe during the question and answers, this may be a thought in some minds. Ali, how much time do we have before we wind up this session? जी? मतलब 11 बजे तक? पौने, अच्छा. So then the floor is open for questions, and we will try and keep to the time. Ji, I've got 2 hands there. I love the gender balance on this. So I will take lots of questions from gentlemen. 2 ladies in the back, and then right up here front we've got, and then at the back we've got another.
Thank you. My name is Kulsum Ahmed. Thank you for the excellent presentations. I wanted to direct a question particularly to Dr. Saima. I really like your work because you're trying to get to the underlying factors. I wondered whether you'd looked at stunting and seeing how that affects how that has an effect, simply because at the lowest income quintile, 57% of children are stunted, according to Pakistan's own data. But even at the highest income quintile, 22% of children are stunted. And stunting is not just short in height, it's actually lack of cognitive ability, low productivity, going to Aasim's point in the future. So that is one question. The other is actually linked with women. You talked about the importance of women's education and being in the workforce. What about what women earn and how much they earn compared with men? Because if women earn the same as your son, then would you be valuing having a son as opposed to having a child, be it a boy or a girl?
Can we take another question?
Hello, my name is Fiza Malik. What I wanted to ask was that given the family structure in Pakistan, it's very patriarchal, and a lot of these choices that you've talked about, having children, using contraception, having more children, are not just the decisions of the husband, but also sometimes the mother-in-law. So do you think targeted interventions of some sort that target fathers or the paternal side of the family would help address some of this population increase?
Okay, thank you so much, Ume Kulsum and Fiza, right? Okay, so I have not looked at stunting, but it's a good idea, I can think about it. And as far as you talked about women incomes, it's about like where, there are a lot of questions in the demographic health survey and other surveys about now they have included the bank accounts, whether you have mobile phone or not. So it's all about whether they do have or not. But the actual question where we need to dig deeper is that whether they have control over those resources, whether they can use this independently. Having a mobile phone does not give you anything. Like we can ask, okay, 50% of the women in the household have the mobile phone, whether they can use it or not, because most of the time they do have cell phone and bank account, but they are not allowed to use these resources. So I would definitely, when women have control over their income and earning, I am pretty sure that they would go for, because then they have to trade off between having more children and to have their income, then I think that could be a positive intervention in which women enter into labor force and have the control over their earning. The fertility will definitely go down. So you talked about mother-in-law and its relationship with contraceptive use. And husbands. Okay. As far as Dr. Zeba can correct me, but I think in Pakistan, mother-in-law does not have much. Current statistics shows that the religion and the influence of mother-in-law and father-in-law on the use of contraception and the family dynamics is not that strong. Men has, but in one of my other paper, I looked at the couples, both husband and wife, and I found that was quite, I was not expecting that finding, but I found that if a woman don't want to have another child, then she will definitely use contraceptive, whether her husband want or not, okay? So it's the gender dynamics are not the way. When the woman actually wants to, then they exercise their say.
Zeba, do you want to add?
I think that over time, I mean, in qualitative research that we've done, it's become a diminishing source of influence. It was certainly very dominant about, I think, in the early 90s. But right now, even in the context of abortion, which wasn't mentioned, another word that wasn't mentioned this morning, there's really very high level of induced abortions that are taking place. And the rate of abortion is the highest in South Asia. Even in that, the control is really not with the extended family. It's a much more nuclear sort of decision between the man and the woman. This is at least what the qualitative. Quantitatively, I don't know.
I think qualitatively, it is very important to see what is happening. And indeed, the influence of extraneous forces on the woman, whether she's the wife, the mother, etc., are less. And that leads to the fact that we need women's empowerment. And with that, can I go to the gentlemen who had raised their hands? We have 2 hands here, please. And then you at the back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Mohsin Khan. I have 2 points, relatively minor, to make. One, Dr. Zeba, on this issue of the political economy aspects, I think that's a great idea to look into. And I'll give you a particular reason why. That for at least over 10 years, or if certainly, no, much longer than that, there has been this tussle in the government, for example, and I used to hear this all the time from the demographers and the family planning side. You'd hear this issue about family planning and reducing the birth rate, etc. From the economist side, or if you like, the leadership side of government, you'd hear about this demographic dividend that Pakistan was building up. So there was this tension. The demographic dividend people won out, but I think this is certainly worth exploring as to what are the factors. My second point is related to Aasim. And the question that I have, Aasim, is that while I don't dispute the trends you have shown in per capita income and in working age population, etc., what I'm thinking you are discounting is the role of the informal market in Pakistan, which is, by estimates that I've seen, is much more significant, much higher than in the comparator countries. So it isn't the case that, if you have the informal market income added in to your GNP, you would show maybe the same trend, but you wouldn't show such a stark difference between the 4 South Asian countries and Pakistan, well, 3 South Asian countries and Pakistan. Secondly, on the working age population, if indeed we're expected to believe that the unemployment rate and the lack of jobs, etc., is so great in Pakistan, then you would see thousands of young people lining up in the streets and sitting around and doing nothing. That's not happening. That's from an casual observation shows that that's not happening. So I think the role of the informal market does provide the jobs, does provide income, and GNP, I think, is then therefore grossly miscalculated, or I don't know, I shouldn't say grossly, is miscalculated across the 4 countries.
The lady at the back.
I am Tasneem Zafar. And my question is that certainly the presentations have shown that population is not just a problem of numbers, rather it is a problem related to human development. And that's why it involves we should involve the private sector as well, as Dr. Zeba has rightly mentioned. Madam, would you please highlight, given the hidden momentum of population and all the strategies that the government sector has adopted so far, what specifically we can do for the age bracket that actually relates to the potential parents, base of potential parents, which is quite high. How private sector can be involved? As one point is very rightly highlighted by Dr. Mohsin, that informal sector and formal sector employment opportunities and educational aspects that needs to be covered. But how specifically we can involve private sector when it comes to the development of that, human capital development of that particular age structure that we have in Pakistan?
Do you want to take?
I don't know whether, Dr. Mohsin, whether yours wasn't a question, right, addressed to me. It was just a comment that who won out. But I think that I just want to comment on your comment that I think that discussion about the demographic dividend continues because I know the State Bank of Pakistan, for instance, the whole research section is really focusing on whether the timing of the dividend, when the timing of the dividend is going to happen. What they fail to understand is that, you can have a young population, as was shown by Aasim, but if it's not really, I disagree with you about the job thing because really the gap between the working age population and the employed population, we've recently been looking at that trend, it's really widening. So you may say that, because they're not reporting work as if they're working in the informal sector, but surely it would show up in savings rates and so on. And it's not, I really don't think that it will make a huge difference in the numbers presented, first of all. And I do think unemployment is rising, particularly amongst the educated group. I don't know if sort of adds to the confusion or not. When I was talking about, the private sector, I was really talking about private sector providers, but there is a lot of work that can be done with the industry, such as, for instance, those women who are working in the textile sector. We've started some work on that. It's really the employers really cooperating more with encouraging more women to retain their position in the labor force, because they do fall out when somebody's sick in the household, when they become pregnant again, etc. So employers to be more friendly towards women, that is another aspect where the private sector can be involved. Private sector providers, as I said, there's a huge role to be played by the private sector. I think expecting the government to come in and do something about the sector, I've kind of lost the hope that that would happen. But one place, I think there could be a huge communication campaign run. I think that's government responsibility to really change mindsets, because I think for the private sector to come in and start doing communication campaigns, I think that's unlikely. I think that is a public service sort of duty.
We've got just 2 more questions, and they're both from gentlemen at the back. And Dr. Aasim is available for an answer. Oh, great. Aasim, before
Thank
we
you.
move on,
Can I step in now, or shall I come back later?
would you like to give your answer now?
I would be delighted. And if I may, I'd like to also actually ask a question of the other panelists, given the opportunity.
Okay.
But if I could, I'd just like to respond to Dr. Mohsen's comment/question a little bit. So I think it is quite possible that GDP in Pakistan is miscalculated because of the informal or economy. But I guess the story that Pakistan's income per capita has grown much less than the other countries still would hold, as long as the degree of informal sector growth in Pakistan has not been dramatically more than in the other countries. So number one, does the informal sector in Pakistan is it necessarily larger than in each of the other countries? And then 2, has it grown more quickly than in the other countries? Both would have to be true in order for this story to be at least partly offset by the informal sector. But I would say that even if both things are true, the fact that Pakistan had twice the income on a per capita basis of Bangladesh, and I was, I think, too young to remember from the early 1970s, and I imagine most of you were too, but I was in Bangladesh in the early 1990s, and it was visibly poorer than Pakistan at the time. I understand, I have not been in Bangladesh since, but I understand that it is visibly richer today than Pakistan is. So I think even anecdotally, the story does hold it, and it does beg the question, what happened? And while we're on that question, so I think Dr. Mohsen's other point, where are all these people? If we have this huge population bulge, why don't we see a sort of massive unemployment on the streets and so on? So I would argue that to some extent we do, but also I think that a large part of the story is the large population is very young. They're under 15 years old, and they're either at home or possibly not going to school and so forth. So that is the bulge that we're going to have to deal with in the coming decade or two. So this leads to the question that I have. I can't resist the opportunity having 3 demographers to ask this question. So my work suggests that when we have the youth population in Pakistan going to the level of our neighbors, so from 35 today to about 25, we then have a hope to be growing as fast as them, holding all other things constant. How long, in your view, would it take for us to go from 35 to 25? And I'm sure it depends on a lot of things, but is it realistic to imagine getting there in a decade? Or is it unimaginable that we would be able to do that in a decade? Thank you.
Do you want to? Mohsen, thank you very much. Aasim, thank you very much for that comment. Would you like to say? I have a small question, and that is, why did IMF never put the population factor into its conditionalities or into its program? To give it that we've all been talking about the political will and the lack of it in countries like Pakistan. And we have been through so many IMF programs and are in one even now. How is it that they overlooked this factor in making it a requirement or suggesting it as a requirement?
So, Dr. Attiya, are you asking rhetorically, or do you really want me to answer?
I'm asking the IMF as it is today. Not
So,
you.
Yeah.
And you as a past friend of IMF.
No, so I think, look, but the right answer, I think, is that many of these conditionalities.
G.
Attiya, you see I've been involved in a number of IMF discussions. I think 2 points I would like to state here, with Mohsen sitting to correct me. One, the IMF comes in normally with balance of payments crises. And they've had some longer term structural programs. But basically, when you have the balance of payments, they're short term.
Mm-hmm.
The question that you could ask is, why did the World Bank or the Asian Bank not concentrate on it? And you've also been involved in it. I think that we go back to maybe the political will issue. I, as a young civil servant, I remember you used to come in General Zia's, I think you were his advisor of the cabinet. I was in the planning commission. And I think that was the time we began to lose steam. I had worked earlier in East Pakistan, where it was Anwar Adil's old program, both with a lot of drive, but going slow. But after that, in Pakistan, I think the political will was lacking. And I can tell you, as one of those who was on the negotiating side from the Pakistan government for more than 2 decades, we would not really push the population planning thing with either the World Bank or the Asian Bank.
Thank you. Aasim, I'm sorry and for everyone here, I'm sorry to you gentlemen, I'm just told we have run out of time, and Farah has worked so hard for this that I don't want, but you will permit me to give the concluding comments, and which I would like to do from here, and I'll do them as fast as I can. As I've just said, we have come to winding down time, and the takeaways that we have today, we have talked about those at length. The panelists, and indeed from the questions and answers, we have a number of issues before us. We know what needs to be done. Somehow we are not getting it done on a sustained basis. And it has been, the family planning program has been nothing but a holding operation. And it has been the whipping horse. It has been a victim of a lot of politics. And despite that, it is people like Zeba and our young demographers who are coming up, and Shahab and Muin, and many people whom I see in the room who have kept it going. I would like very quickly to prioritize 4 strategies which I think we need to address in Pakistan and move more seriously than we have been doing. The first, of course, is to convert the demographic disaster, because it is today in a disaster stage, into a dividend. And I'm talking about the age cohort of 15 to 30. That's approximately 35% of our population. What do we seek to do in this demographic transition? An economist, a school of economists led by David Bloom, have worked on it, and indeed they have shown that it does work. And what is it that we are seeking? We are seeking the programming of this age group, 15 to 30, with knowledge, skills-based education, and thereon, as an essential, they must have gainful employment. This is doable. But a word of caution. This segment of youth today, and Mohsen, I think you need to stay more in Pakistan to feel it. There is the informal sector, and yes, people are absorbed there, but the youth today is very combustible, and we can see it all the time. But there is also a silver lining, and that is that we can capitalize on our human resource base. We have seen it today. And we know China has done it, Bangladesh has done it, India has done it, and David Bloom tells us that if we benefit from this 50 years window of opportunity, Pakistan can do it as well and become an Asian tiger like Thailand. But that needs a lot of consistent work and prioritizing the whole issue of population around all development matters. A corollary to this, and an immediate second priority which flows from this, is of course the fact that we have to achieve zero population growth, at least by 2035. Otherwise, our window of opportunity goes. We have talked about the 15 to 30. I'm now talking of the below 15. The age pyramid has not skewed the way that it should have in Pakistan. So what do we need? Plain and simple. We need to resuscitate. The fact is, the program has been there. It knows what to do. We are only seeking to resuscitate the government family planning service delivery program. It is unthinkable and unpardonable that today we have as many as 2.2 million abortions every year in Pakistan. And that is by women who know that ye haram hai. And when we look at the unmet need, all they need is quality service. And the unmet need today, Zeba, how much do we place it at? how many million women haven't? 7 million. Look at this. There are 7 million women in Pakistan, married women in the reproductive age group, who want family planning. And they cannot get services. So the whole issue it's simple. Women want it. Whether it's the government is the authority and the instrument to serve people. And yes, the private sector has a role to play. And I remember years ago, and I remember Sayyid Babar Ali Saab talking about packages and where we began work for the employees there, etc. So that can happen. Now, in suggesting this, how do we meet these millions? And this is the low-hanging tree. We immediately get on with the demographic change that we need. There is a program. The Council of Common Interest has approved it. The actions are there. After the 18th Amendment, unfortunately, many things, and particularly the most sensitive and those relating to human development, collapsed. But in the population field, we've got the staff, we've got the budget, we've got it all there. The question is, who will roll it out? It's being costed. It can only be rolled out when we can get rid of government apathy, and the second is political negativity. These are the two issues, plain and simple. The third, and I'll very quickly go, the Constitution of Pakistan talks about the local government. We must get down to devolution from the province to the districts. The district is your level of governance and administration, and certainly something as private and personal as family planning must be taken to the doorstep, as all other human development programs, education, health, everything, employment for women, empowerment of women, socio-cultural change, the local government, and is the lowest tier, and that is where we need to move. This is sectoral change. It's a big change. It's again a political decision, but it's one that is needed. The final request that I make is that we do not look at all our many climate change and biodiversity issues in silos. We are water-starved, we are flood-hit, we are energy short, we are food insecure, name it, and we are there. But what do? Each group thinks its own plan up, and thereafter, on a totally unplanned level, we never think of bringing all these things together and working. Yes, we have a good, at this point, I think that the plan that we have on climate change, the one which the Climate Change Ministry has made, it is useful. If you add, the population sector has been added. If you add the other important add-ons, I think that, again, we will have something to do. So what will happen to all these words of wisdom and all this good information and evidence-based data which we are getting in this conference over 3 days? Let me say, unfortunately, we cannot leave it on up on some shelf. And my answer, I'm talking to researchers. For a researcher, the best respondent is the person who has lived through the whole issue. And I seem to be one such person. So as a participant observation, I would like to say that it is December 2002, and Pakistan has hit rock bottom. It is on IMF ventilator. The corrupt political economy has collapsed. And when you talk of the political economy, Mohsen, I think that the model we have got is corruption-based. So we've got a corrupt political economy which has collapsed democracy. No anodyne prescriptions are going to work for Pakistan. We need urgent action. And if I may say, we are in an emergency. And the need for is, number one, for a national, functional government, and concurrently, what is needed is direction for an economic stabilization and growth plan. The ingredients of that economic stabilization plan and the other parts of our program are available over what I have heard in the last 2 days in this conference. We have no dearth of good minds and good people. And indeed, This is my shout to those who can make it happen. The only last question is, are those who can make it happen listening? Thank you very much. And with that, we need to thank, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be here, Farah for putting and curating this excellent panel, and to the participants for their audience, for their attention. Thank you.